Welcome to Season 2 of the Erotic Realm podcast, where we explore the world of eroticism, one erotic realm at a time. I'm Em, a sexologist and kinkster. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize desire in all of its forms, including darker desires. Each episode, we dive deep into the psychology of desire with a sexpert, everyday kinkster, or a kink expert. This is an independent podcast. To support it, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at psychologyofdesire.com, where you'll also find deep dives into desire and surveys that you can participate in. You can also sign up there to get the podcast delivered directly to your inbox when it's released. And now for today's episode. Before we get started, I have something very excited to announce. The podcast has been nominated for the Australian Adult Industry Awards in the category of Best Podcast. So if you'd love to vote for the Erotic Realm to win this category, it would be amazing to have your support. I'll put a link to the voting website in the show notes, and I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a click and a vote, and who knows, maybe it will win Best Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. If you'd like to support the podcast, please consider checking out the brands that support the Erotic Realm. There's FirmTech, whose tech ring offers fascinating insights into sexual health by tracking erection quality and nocturnal function. Splash Blanket, who create luxurious waterproof blankets designed for comfort, intimacy, and real-life messes. ProDX Health, who offer discreet, at-home STI testing. While Karoo and Lovance make premium pleasure technology, from couple toys to long-distance interactive devices. Then there's Lioness, who are doing something truly unique in sex tech, using biofeedback and orgasm data to help people better understand their arousal. I'm also partnering with Flow and Desire, science-backed libido support supplements designed to support sexual vitality and well-being. These are brands that I find genuinely interesting, science-backed, and I've used them myself, so they come with my recommendation. You can find the links to all of them in the episode description. If you try them, use the links below. It supports the show at no extra cost to you. And now, back to today's conversation. The following conversation explores one of the most provocative questions in erotic psychology. Can kink ever support healing from trauma? Today, I'm joined by Aidan Sunassee, sexologist, researcher, and dominant. Together we explore the psychology of power, asexuality, and total power exchange through a deeply nuanced lens. We unpack what it means to identify as both asexual and kinky, why growth-oriented dominance differs from control-focused power, and how ethical total power exchange may be far more relational and accountable than outsiders often assume. We explore trauma-informed kink, drawing on Aidan's own research, the difference between intentional and incidental trauma play, and whether pleasure can in some contexts become a catalyst for post-traumatic growth rather than re-traumatization. This is also a conversation about stigma around dominance, around intense power exchange, and around erotic identities that don't fit conventional categories. This episode asks a difficult question. What can power become when it is held ethically, consensually, and in service of growth? Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm. Today we're exploring the erotic realm of Aidan. Welcome, Aidan.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So first of all, we like to get started with just a little bit about your day-to-day life and what you get up to outside of the erotic realm. What do you enjoy doing?
Right, absolutely. So just a quick hello, my name's Aidan, and I would love to go a little bit into what I do as a job and everything, but all of that is very wrapped up in kink as well. I'm a kink educator and a kink consultant. But outside of that, just to diverge the best I can, I do really enjoy music. I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, nothing published anywhere whatsoever. But, you know, my biggest stage is my living room. I play the piano, the guitar, I recently picked up the electric guitar as well, which has been a wonderful experience all throughout. Quite enjoy writing. I enjoy writing poetry very specifically. Mm, what else? I love nature, long hikes, especially in the woods. And recently I've been getting back into reading fiction after a long hiatus of, let's say, nonfiction only literary consumption. So that's been pretty nice.
So much creativity. I love it. You mentioned a little bit about your work. Can you share about that with us now?
Absolutely, I can. I've started launching Dominant Discourse sometime last year, I believe around July, and it's taken off relatively fast. It made me quite happy. But the original reason why I started it off is because I've realized that when I've been looking for resources for dominant identifying individuals that are part of the kink community, there wasn't all that much content targeted directly to them, not that much resources that were directed towards general dominant well-being and self-care. So I decided, why not put some resources out there and do my best to educate people, but also show that the struggles that I have gone through and that a lot of people have gone through while coming to terms with their own identity and learning how to flourish in their kink dynamics, that those things weren't necessarily, to be hidden and really buried underneath and could be talked about openly, and that they could have support around it. And on top of that, I also do a lot of writing and translation, do a lot of gigs that anything that involves words, I'm usually pretty happy to do.
Yeah. It's one of the ongoing themes of the podcast, men speaking to me about this desire for understanding dominance from a healthy perspective, and the fact that they're taught what toxic masculinity is over and over again, but
Right.
not many examples of this healthy masculinity or dominance. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very much needed.
Thank you so much. I do really appreciate that. I agree
Yeah.
with the statement on toxic masculinity. I think it's talked about a lot, and with that, a lot of things are talked about that dominance or men that aren't mutually exclusive, but specifically those two categories are not supposed to do, and what's
Mm.
not acceptable, and what where aren't supposed to say or aren't supposed to be like. But there aren't really a lot of good examples of, hey, this is what you can do to
Mm-hmm.
take care of yourself and take care of the people around you. So it definitely
Mm.
calls to me quite a bit.
Mm. And what was your background before beginning dominant discourse?
So I've studied psychology. I've specifically studied and specialized in traumatology, and my research generally has been in the direction of trauma play, which is the introduction of trauma related aspects within, in my case, in the cases I've studied, within kink practices and kink scenes that are very often used with the goal of inducing some therapeutic aspects within oneself. And more recently, well, predominant discourse, but still more recently, about the mental and emotional capacity in dominance, and how to really maintain that without giving up too much of yourself. Because going to the complete opposite of toxic masculinity, or
Mm.
just toxic everything else, there's a long list of terms I could really use. On the other side of it, there slowly becomes this issue of giving too much of yourself and giving too much of your emotional resources, to the point where it's very easy to deplete everything that you have to give, really.
Mm-hmm. Again, very important work, and I'd love to get into the trauma play and your research around that a little bit later. For
Hmm.
now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you and your eroticism. So, how do you currently identify, both in terms of your sexuality and your kink identity?
Right. So, in terms of my sexuality, I would say I'm a dominant for first and foremost. I'm asexual, at least some flavor of it. I'm very sex positive slash sex favorable, I believe the term is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of a weird mishmash of terms at this point. But the main things I go with are dominant and asexual, and of course, I'm a kink identified person. I think when it comes to my sexual identity and my erotic identity, kinky is really the word that encapsulates it the most.
Mm.
It's always been very intrinsic to my being in a lot of ways.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And what would you say are your top three kinks currently?
That is a very good question, and it's always one that I struggle to answer a little bit because I always say my main kink and my main appeal is control, but I can try to get into the nitty gritty of it a little bit.
Sure.
I do quite enjoy edge play and very specifically mental edge play, and around that would be everything around erotic hypnosis and long term conditioning and training. I am a sadist, so pain play as a whole is very much up there for me. And let's see. Lastly, I would say that hmm, I quite enjoy marking slash branding, not necessarily in the heat stamp sort of way, but anything that involves whether it be hickeys or scratching or marking in any other way, body writing, tattooing, all of that. I think having my name on somebody's body is always something that tickles my brain a little bit, whether
Mhm.
in fantasy or in reality. I think those three things. And I think you'll notice that they all kind of circle back to the theme of control and ownership in a lot of ways, which
Mm.
is again the main theme. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so you mentioned that you're a dominant, but you're also asexual. So for
Correct.
you, is kink a non-sexual play?
So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a non-sexual form of play. I'm definitely sex favorable in a lot of ways. I enjoy it, but the main thing that comes up for me, and that's something I've realized very early on, that my arousal and my affection towards people are very tied up in power exchange.
Mhm.
So this really is everything from my sexual attraction, my romantic attraction, or even to some extent my aesthetic attraction to people comes after that first experience of an exchange of power. And this is kind of why I always say I'm some flavor of asexual. It's kind of hard to place, but
Mm.
it takes that first step of power exchange of a definite, very well defined hierarchy in order for me to let's say almost unlock that ability to feel arousal towards people in that way.
Mm. Fascinating. And you realized that early on, you said. How did you realize this?
Well, in retrospect, I can only think about it from
Mhm.
this point on, but I've never quite dated in a vanilla fashion, so in a non-kinky fashion. So knowingly or unknowingly, I've always been dabbling with some form of power exchange. And funnily enough, thinking back, I would say I was pretty decent when it comes to negotiation because I would start off dating very casually, even in high school and the like, and I would be like, "Oh, I like making decisions around this thing and that thing and that thing." And if we're going to have a relationship, I need to make the decisions around this thing and that thing and that thing. And I didn't have the words for it necessarily, but I always said that I enjoyed being in charge and that I enjoyed having a person by my side or people by my side that would enjoy my enjoyment of being in charge. And that's often how I would put it.
Mm. And this was before you discovered the kink world and the terminology and BDSM. So how did
Correct, yeah.
you discover that? What was that process like?
So I originally discovered it, I believe, just through some obscure online forum that I can't necessarily remember the name of, but it was something that collected a bunch of articles as to people's experiences in the kink community, and that
Mm.
was also relatively early. I'm not going to get into the ages and the specificities of that, but
Mhm.
getting into that and noticing that there were terms for, let's just say, the control that I craved so intensely in my intimate connections and in my close connections. And there were terms for the feeling that I could not help but feel the second I became emotionally close to somebody was at the same time an exhilarating but also a very relieving experience because it comes with an odd level of internalized, oh, is there something terribly, terribly broken and dark within my being that I so
Mm.
enjoy being in control of people, right? So
Mhm.
seeing people talk about that openly and people identifying as submissives or as slaves or just several flavors of S type saying that they genuinely enjoyed being either controlled or owned or used, quote unquote, was something that I really enjoyed reading and hearing about, and that allowed me to really start exploring that side of me a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that you're currently in a total power exchange with two partners.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So for someone unfamiliar with this, how would you describe what total power exchange actually looks like in your day-to-day life?
Right. I would say that the easiest way I can really put it is that I have, at least the way I live it, is that I have the final decision on all matters. And it's something that I often have to explain in the sense that we still plan things together. We still have negotiated and consistently talk about roles and the general basis and baseline of the power exchange. And there's never anything I wouldn't do without the clear initial agreement. It's something that I often have to talk about and explain.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the agreement that we landed on and that we are most comfortable with, that is most fulfilling to all of us, is I take the final. I take the final decisions. I have the final say on things, and whether it's something as simple as, say, what we're having for a specific meal, or what we are doing in 5 years, what our long term plans are, where they are going, either career wise or life wise, and little personal things that have to do with every single, life area or aspect of life. The final say is mine, as much as they can put all of their input and their preferences and their beliefs. And usually I really take those in stride and go for those, but that's just a me thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And how do you ensure this ongoing meaningful consent in these dynamics? Do you have a set time where you would sit down and make sure that everything is still consensual? Is it more fluid? How do you approach that?
I would say when we started off, one of my partners I've known for just about 8 years, the other for over 5 now. And when we first started off, obviously we did not start off in a total power exchange relationship. That would be a little absurd in a lot of ways. But when we first started off, there were a lot of structured conversations where we would go through specific things that were, let's say, on the okay to control list and the not okay to control list, and the like. It's all stuff that we talked about in depth. But in both cases, they are my partners, they are my submissives, they are my slaves, they are also my best friends. So I know them very well. We've spent a long time talking about what we aspire to be as people, but as parts of this dynamic as well. So at this point, it's very, very fluid. We don't have a let's sit down and have a kink negotiation conversation necessarily, but we have very consistent check-ins when they'll ask me, "Oh, are you happy? Are you feeling fulfilled? Do you have all your needs met?" And I'll do the exact same, and I'll ask them, "Are you feeling comfortable? Is your subspace feeling good? Are you feeling like all of your needs are met? Do you need anything?" And those are things that are really sprinkled throughout the day more than structured. I will randomly wake up and just say, "Hey, are you doing okay? Do you feel like all your needs are met today? Is there anything you need from me?" And it's kind of done more casually like that.
Beautiful. So, what do you wish was spoken about more when it comes to this type of relationship?
The dominants aren't tyrants is my main answer, but I can elaborate on that a little bit. I think there is, when it comes to mainstream representation and just mainstream understanding, there's often an unspoken line as to where dominance is acceptable and isn't acceptable anymore. And when it comes to sexual pleasure and sexual fulfillment on both ends, that's often on the societal green, let's just say. And people are very happy to appreciate dominance and dominant submission. Dominant, rather, people are more willing to appreciate dominant submissive relationships in those scenarios. But when I start talking about the fact that at the end of the day, I have the last say as to whether, like, say, what job they end up in and what they plan for on their long term, just long term goals and the general connections that they have in life, that's where a lot of people tend to feel a little, let's just say, ruffled the wrong way and be like, that starts to sound very abusive in a lot of ways. And the word abuse gets thrown out more often than I like it to. When, if I am to have that conversation with my partners and they are to have that conversation with me, which are the only three people to which those things are really relevant to and important, right? If we are to sit down and have those conversations, I will very clearly hear, I feel so much more comfortable with you making those important and defining decisions about my life than taking them myself, because you have proven and you have shown that I can trust you with these things in the long run. And the decisions you have taken up to now are decisions that have taken into consideration my preferences, my wants, and my needs, sometimes even beyond what I would consider for myself.
Mm.
And I think it's a way to really lean into the most honest and intrinsic aspects of ourselves, which is they really do desire the level of control over them. As to whys and the hows, we can never really know. And I really desire that level of control over them as well. And as to whys and the hows, we'll never really know. But it's the most honest and the most real aspects of ourselves. And why
Mm.
not lean into that? And why not be honest and accepting and almost loving towards those parts of ourselves and just say yes? If everybody's consenting and willing, why not really go for it and do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing how much you enjoy the control, but there's also a lot of responsibility that you're holding, right?
Absolutely.
Do you ever experience emotional or psychological fatigue in your role as dominant? And if so, how do you address it?
I do. Undeniably, I do. There is, holding power over somebody that you care about with everything you are and everything you could ever be is a very intense experience.
Mm.
And there's a certain emotional, let's say, just depth in it being responsible for their pleasure, for their day-to-day life, but also their limits and what their no's are and what their yeses are. Again, all of it has been talked about and slowly built up over time. But at the end of the day, I have, say, safe worded for one of my partners before they did, because they did not realize they were at a limit. And sometimes they have, and I have stopped. And afterwards, they just looked at me like, you know what? I feel like I'm better off trusting you to push and to stop me, because now I can feel resentment towards myself that I stopped because I didn't actually want to. And
Mm.
it's a very fine line that is I really in a lot of ways want to put them first, but sometimes putting my gut feeling first is what the best decision is. And it can feel like I'm almost walking a tightrope sometimes. I'm hyper aware of not overstepping or causing harm, even very unintentionally. And it does take a level of emotional labor that's very constant to notice all the subtle cues that they aren't necessarily aware that they're giving me. And after a while, noticing that constant non-verbalized consent from their end is almost just consistently noticing body language. I learned
Mm.
to read nonverbal signals. It's everything from the way they look at me to the tone of the voices to the breathing patterns. I talk a lot about the breathing patterns. They'll roll their eyes at me about it sometimes. But they tell me a lot, really. And it it comes from practice, and it's a very convenient level of intuition, but it also means that I carry more tension within myself than I would in a lot of other relationships. And it can be a little draining at times, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And for me, that really overpowers any emotional weight or drain that I could be feeling, because let's just say when they look at me and there's a lot of trust, and it's total trust, and I know it's really unwavering, that fills me with purpose in every single possible way purpose could mean. In every single possible meaning of purpose, it just fills me with it. I get to see them explore themselves. I get to see them just grow and heal, but not necessarily healing is one thing, but just grow in a lot of ways into themselves and find more and more confidence. And that makes that pressure worth it. And it taps into what I think is a core part of myself, which is a desire to guide and to take charge in a way that's really loving and puts them first in a kind of an ironic way.
Mm.
And yeah, that aside, I do also practice general self-care things, or I do my best to be consistent with them, just as exercising regularly, discussing my own boundaries, because sometimes it's harder to notice my own than theirs. And I just need to make sure that I don't feel like I'm carrying the entire whole world and that I'm talking to them openly because they are very well able to support me in the same way I support them. And I need to remind myself of that. But ultimately, what makes it sustainable is that trust and that communication, not to be a little cliche, but I think those two things are going to come up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. I'm really picking up on your focus on being a growth-oriented dominant. Would you
I am,
say
yeah.
that that's a prerequisite for being an ethical dominant?
I would say so. I would say so. And defining growth is the part that gets tricky, I
Mm,
believe. And I wouldn't put a singular meaning as to what that means for every single person. For me, I know that it means that I'm consistently noticing things that I could be doing better, not in a way that's eternally kind of beating upon myself and just saying, "Oh my god, you could be doing better." It's not that, but it's recognizing that every single day I'm meeting a different version of them, and every single day I'm meeting a different version of myself. So every single day something will have to be done differently, and through those different experiences and through meeting all these versions of ourselves, I get to learn how to do things in a way that's a little bit more fluid, a little bit more natural, a way that really minimizes any potential, say, stress or pressure that I could put up in myself as I go, or that I could just do things in a way that allows them to, as I like to put it, turn off their minds and let me lead in a way that feels very safe and very contained, in a way that they know that every single thing is going to be taken care of, or that the things they are to take care of for me are going to be spoken about in a way that is clear and understandable, that there won't be anything that is kind of hard to reach or hard to understand. That is a skill that takes building. So for me, that's what growth is. It's making sure we are at the best possible place we can potentially be at the moment we're in.
Sounds delightful. What would you say to a dominant new to the scene that is focused on the control elements of total power exchange and not the growth elements that you're speaking to?
Hmm. Understand that focusing on growth alone is going to train you faster than you think, and focusing on control alone is also going to train you faster than you think.
Mm,
Those two things have to go hand in hand. There's really no way out of that, because when I say control, I think about control over yourself first of all before you try to control anybody else. And
right.
it also, if I'm thinking about somebody who's really just starting off and is thinking about the total power exchange aspect, my first piece of advice is slow down. Let's take a second.
Hmm.
Let's learn about ourselves. It takes a lot of introspection to understand why you want to be in a relationship like that, and how it feeds you and how it feeds the people around you. Because it can be, it can be easy to think, I'm going to lean into a power exchange relationship. Let's put the total aside for a second, but I'm going to lean into a power exchange relationship and it's going to be wonderful and all fun and games. And they're going to do what I tell them to do. And it's going to be fulfilling. But there's also the part of this where you are holding part of somebody else. You're leading somebody else down a path, and every single one of the decisions that are yours, all of the consequences will be yours to see and yours to manage and yours to hold emotionally and psychologically. And control over yourself will have to come first, because you need to be able to stand there, watch the consequences of every single decision you've taken, whether good or bad. And if it turns out great, not, let your ego take off about it. And if it
Mm,
turns out terribly, to stay humble enough to say, okay, well, that wasn't the best decision. That's on me. My bad. Let's go through steps of repair for it. Let's make sure that everybody's taken care of and safe. But not only that, also have the control over yourself and the respect for yourself and your partners to not talk down on yourself, to not let yourself be absolutely guilt ridden to the point where they have to come in and take care of you and hold you. And you are then somehow magically absolved from the responsibility of the decision that you originally messed up on. And I would say, going back to the somebody who's only focused on control, if you're going to be focused on control, focus on the control over yourself before you focus on the control over anybody else, and pair that with that growth oriented mindset. And just do your best to be kind to yourself and to the people around you in the process, because it's very easy to fall into extremes in a lot of different paths, whether it be, imposter syndrome, or getting really high on your own little ego boost when you're really deep into the dom frenzy,
Mm.
or there's a lot of different ways you could go, and extremes are not the way to go. Says somebody in a total power exchange relationship. You can't go for the extremes unless you control yourself, as
Mm.
you really mess with aspects of those extremes. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned dom frenzy just now. I've heard the term and the phrase sub frenzy a lot and see it spoken
Mhm.
about in the community, but I don't see dom frenzy spoken about so much. Can you speak to that a little bit and what that might look like in someone or perhaps yourself?
Absolutely, I can, and I also don't see it talked about quite enough.
Mm.
Hence, again, dominant discourse came up for a reason. I think I've spoken about that a little bit over on the Instagram and on my blog. But the TLDR, it really would be that you hop into a new dynamic, be it a new relationship or a new play partner connection, and it just takes over your mind in a lot of ways. It's suddenly you're thinking about contracts and about colors and about what am I going to do 5 months from now when we've done this and we've done that, or maybe we should plan a scene around kink number one, kink number two, kink number three, and kink number one, two, and three are not necessarily negotiated yet. They haven't
Mm.
necessarily been talked about, or it can be that you've been talking to somebody for a little bit, but you suddenly decide to be in a dynamic and suddenly you want to try all of the things and control all of the things. Suddenly you're wondering where they are and what they're doing and who they're talking to. And there's so many little things and different aspects that can just seep into your mind. And it's almost intrusive at time, and I've heard a lot of fellow dominants tell me the same, that it's almost kind of little blotches of intrusive thoughts going into your brain of, oh, wait, I kind of want to latch onto this and know everything about what they're doing, and it's not sustainable. In a lot of ways, it's just not sustainable. It's draining, and it's something that, going back to control, self-control, it's something that you need to be able to notice and think, oh, wait a minute, I really should not be thinking of doing a long-term dynamic with this person that I just met 3 months ago. I don't think that's a great idea. How about we sit down and have a conversation about something that we would both enjoy doing, that would scratch that itch, but also make sure that we know where we're standing and that we're negotiating and we're talking about things with the understanding that our brains want to go a lot faster, that our bodies and that our realities are ready for.
Mm. Mm-hmm. So taking your time is extremely important. Do you have a particular time limit that you set for yourself and that you recommend for other dominants in terms of how long between, say, meeting someone and then considering a dynamic and then moving into more of a total power exchange dynamic?
I wouldn't say that I have something that I would recommend for any other dominance, because it is so much of an individual decision and an
Mm-hmm.
individual choice. I would say, however, that if you have just met somebody, you are definitely not ready to delve into a total power exchange relationship. That I can say with absolute certainty. And it's probably something that you still aren't ready for until, at least, and I'm saying at least with a huge emphasis on those two words, at least a couple of years have passed. And it really depends as to what you do within those couple of years, right? Are
Mm.
you already living together? Are you spending hours and hours and hours of your day together, allowing yourselves time to get to know each other when you're tired, when you're sick, when you're grumpy, when work has been absolutely awful and all you want to do is shut your brain off and just do something completely unrelated? Have you gotten to know the other person in all of those terrible, terrible states? And are
Mm.
you able to stand by them and say, yep, I still want to own slash I still want to be owned by this person? And it sounds, it sounds easy slash maybe it doesn't, but it sounds simpler than it is. But for, say, a submissive, me spending time with their dominant after they've had an absolutely terrible day and they're kind of grumpy and disgruntled and they just don't want to be dealing with any decisions right now because they're experiencing decision fatigue. There's been so much going on. And at
Mhm.
the end of the day, they're just like, I can't do this right now. I don't feel like it. Let's just, do something. You choose something, actually. You go ahead and choose something, and I don't want to be dealing with it. It's something that a lot of submissives are not going to expect, especially from somebody that they believe and entirely think wants and likes being in control. And that one thing does not negate the other. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, and there are some days where decisions are going to be harder than others. Are you able to stand by a dominant when they aren't able to do that? And for dominants, are you able to stand by a submissive where they don't feel submissive that day? They just don't. They still are serving you. They're still following protocol. They're still following rules. They're still agreeing to follow specific commands that you're giving them. They're doing everything right on paper, but they just don't feel submissive that day. Are you willing to sit with that and pat your ego on the head and go, okay, well, they are doing everything I told them to do, and this is fine. But I just got to sit with the fact that they aren't necessarily in subspace that day, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Right? It takes a lot of just self calibrating and interpersonal calibrating. And it takes a lot of learning how to coexist with an individual in all of their states before you can say a total power exchange relationship sounds sustainable.
Mhm. I love the use of the word calibrating there. I think that's so important, and that's great advice. Thank you.
Of course.
So let's chat about trauma. One of the
Let us chat
traditions,
about trauma.
yeah, one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring a research article with you. And today I'm
Mhm.
excited because we're actually exploring your very own research. So, in your paper, Pleasure as a Catalyst for Post Traumatic Growth and Courage Gain in Trauma Play, you explore how kink, particularly trauma informed kink, can function as a
Mhm.
space for healing, growth, and transformation. And you
Right.
describe how pleasure, power, and intentionality can intersect in ways that allow people to process past experiences and develop resilience.
Mhm.
I'm really curious, what led you to explore this connection between trauma, pleasure, and kink in this research?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm going to say that this paper has been expanded up and is actually getting, being prepared for actual publication right now. And a lot of what was written in that initial piece
Mm,
is let's not say outdated, but there's so much more information that has come out within the last couple of years. It's
cool.
actually mind blowing how much kink research has been exploding. Both so let's say a lot of colleagues and myself have been working on a lot of great things. So it's been really, really nice seeing how kink and trauma is being talked about in a way
Hmm.
that is not pathologizing for once. It's making me really happy.
Mm,
But going back to the actual inspiration, quote unquote, for this, one of my partners, we've been, and he actually helps me run a lot of dominant discourse, Charlie. He and I have dabbled in trauma play quite a bit, and seeing the growth and seeing how much he has flourished over the years since, let's just say, even our very first trauma play scene is something that really led me to want to explore the specific mechanisms that allow people to go from a state of just bodily and mental hyperarousal and kind of a fight or flight, to put it more simply, state to really relaxing into be it a dynamic or a scene in that moment and allow themselves to rewrite the narrative of specific traumatic experiences that they might have experienced in the past.
mm,
And originally, in a lot of ways, in a lot of past scientific statement, let's just say, there was kind of a historical stigmatization of kink that stated that if you're kinky, you must be inherently traumatized and
Mm-hmm.
that it was linked to childhood abuse. And that's definitely been fully debunked at this point. I just so happen to be working with a population that have childhood trauma and are kinky. So I just want to put it out there, first of
Right.
all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I've been wanting to know a little bit more as to what leads to that start of healing or healing experiences for some people. And from this piece of research that you just mentioned, pleasure is one of the things that came up, and that did come up as statistically significant as to post traumatic growth after a trauma play scene. And as
Mm.
I kept and keep researching it, I'm seeing pleasure as a very important factor when it comes to delving into past traumatic aspects and leaning into them a little bit when in trauma play scenes. For example, say somebody has negative associations with being touched a specific way or talked to a specific way. They negotiate around that. They try to do certain aspects of it within a scene as safely as they can, as safely as it can be done within kink, with all of their safe words and all of that sweet stuff. And if they allow themselves and are able to pair that sensation that could be mildly uncomfortable to very uncomfortable with a certain level of pleasure, that has helped a lot of people as to a couple interviews I've had and the research that has been done slash is being done. It's helped a good amount of people rewrite slash almost change that association in their minds to, oh, if I'm feeling that specific sensation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's directly connected to that past traumatic experience.
Mm.
The
Mm-hmm.
memory gets quote unquote updated to that scene or to that dynamic where the meaning of it and meaning making is something that I'm seeing is increasingly important to
Mm.
really explore that initial experience, but then make their own meaning out of it, having the power and having the ability to change that narrative to something that you have actively chosen, that you have asked for, that is really part of your own self advocacy and your ability to make your own decisions as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that really changes that association, that changes that narrative and allows for a lot of healing experiences.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Such powerful work. And yes to healing and the meaning making and the pleasure is so fascinating. So,
Hmm.
this is a really controversial area because I see it again and again on FetLife, people discussing the healing nature of kink, whether it's someone that's new to the scene or someone that's been in a dynamic for a while, and they'll bring up
Hmm.
this idea that they've explored a traumatic experience in a kinky scene and had healing from it. And
Right.
I'll see these two different arguments about it. There'll be people that will come in and say, no, we should never use kink as trauma play. And
Hmm.
then there's this other side, which you're speaking to, which will say that there is a lot of healing that can come from this exploration. So what would you say to these people that are really pushing back on this and saying that we should never use kink for trauma play?
What I'll say is I understand. I
Mm.
understand the hesitancy around it. I absolutely do. When we're dealing with something as personal and as vulnerable as trauma, and trying to lean into it or trying to work with it in a way that's let's just say non-mainstream, it's understandable that there's a lot of doubt and a lot of pushback around it, and that really does make sense to me.
Hmm.
I've talked to a lot of people that have tried to, let's say, dabble into some aspects of their past trauma, and it didn't go great, and they haven't tried it since. And I understand that if something doesn't go great, you aren't necessarily going to do it. What I do have to bring up, however, is I do think there are a lot of variables and a lot of factors that can really change that experience. And going a little bit further into current research that I'm working on slash finalizing currently, one of the things that I believe is greatly important is drawing the line between what I call intentional trauma play and incidental trauma play. And
Mm.
What's intentional would be something that's absolutely deliberate, that's something pre-negotiated when somebody says, I want to focus on this specific thing or that specific thing, and I actively want to do this in order to process some feelings I have around it. So I'm already prepared and I'm already ready to lean into that, right? However, there are a lot of cases where aspects of trauma can pop up within a scene that you aren't necessarily ready for. It's
Mm.
spontaneous, it's unplanned, it's emerging absolutely organically. And in a lot of cases, some people do end up experiencing some aspects of healing despite not having planned for that trauma play scene. However, that's often when things can go a little bit off because nobody's necessarily ready to deal with that specific trigger. The
Mhm.
person leading that scene doesn't necessarily know what's going on, doesn't necessarily know what the trigger is. The person who is experiencing um, those specific memories was not mentally prepared for it. And there's this wild card nature of it, really, that can amplify that intensity and make it a bit more likely to lead to negative consequences. So,
Mm.
those are very important factors. But there is also the fact that I I do truly believe that the core aspects of kink really are consent, communication, and aftercare, and the ability to learn from your own mistakes. And from what I've seen and what I've heard and what the research says up to now, and there's an increasing amount of it coming out, especially this year, I would advise anybody who has a lot of qualms against trauma play to really keep an eye out on the coming research because it's some wonderful stuff that really shows that the people that felt that trauma play harmed them also had aspects in their relationships or in the dynamics or the scenes that did not go along with those core tenets of kink, which are consent,
Mm.
communication, aftercare, the ability to learn from your mistakes. So there was some aspect of non consent going on, or some lack of communication, or some ethical boundary being either pushed or completely broken. And that often led to that re traumatization. And that's often what people talk about, re
Mm.
traumatization. They
Mhm.
often say, how do you know that you're not going to be re-traumatized? And in the work I've done, I've really seen that intentionality, trust, education, communications are the things that keep re-traumatization at bay. And it's
Mhm.
all about really making sure that we are not pushing the boundaries of consent and communication, and that we are understanding that some things might turn out to not go as we planned them to go. However, we need to talk about it. We need to learn from those mistakes, and that constant communication and that ability for mutual repair, either within oneself or interpersonally, is what keeps things from traumatizing us over and over and over again.
Mm. So what I'm getting from that is that when there has been re-traumatization, it's been the dynamic that was harmful rather than the trauma play itself.
Very often, yes.
Mm.
Very, very often. It's whether it be a dynamic or a specific play scene with somebody that they aren't necessarily in a dynamic with. It is often that there is something that did not go as planned, or a boundary
Mm.
was pushed, or there was a miscommunication that happened outside of the trauma play experience in itself that led to re-traumatization. That's usually the trend that I see and that I hear about.
Mhm. Okay, well, fascinating. When is this latest research due to come out? I'll have to keep an eye out for it. It sounds amazing.
I'm hoping to get it out this year. That
Mm.
is the plan, but at the earliest, I'm hoping early next.
Mm. And
At
do
the
you
latest, rather.
yeah, do you plan on holding workshops around this or doing some kind of education around it? I think it's really needed.
I do now and then. I've worked with a couple people. I'm yet to put up my own workshops, so to say,
Mhm.
but I'm putting out educational slides on it on Instagram now and then, and over time, I'm hoping to be able to hold little either roundtables or just let's say research breakdowns for folks to be able to stay updated with what's going on in the research world. I think it is so very important for community and research to work together. I think that's my tagline in a lot of places, really bringing just research and community together. Because
Mm.
as a researcher and a community member, a King community member, I think that research needs to learn from the people it's researching, and the people in that community needs to be able to have access to that research, to learn from it, to understand it, to have it broken down in ways that are accessible for people who need that. And whatever is quote unquote taken from the community needs to go back to the community. And that's very heavily what I'm hoping to do through this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for doing it. It's so important. And yeah, I'll keep an eye out for what comes next for you.
I'll definitely let you know.
So, jumping back into your own story and your eroticism now, I usually ask people to bring along something to share. I'm not sure if I've asked you yet, but I'm curious to see what you refer to. I normally ask people to bring a quote, a book, or a movie that's influenced their eroticism and just explain a little bit about how it influenced them. Do you have something that comes to mind when I ask you this?
I do.
Cool.
I do. So I noted something down, and I'll be honest, I picked the most cliche quote I possibly could, and I'm a researcher. I probably should know better, but I don't know if you're familiar with The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, the poem. And it goes, I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, the joke is that Frost was apparently in on a joke himself. The poem isn't really a celebration of bold individualism in any way, really. The two roads were about the same, and at least that's what Frost said when speaking of the poem. He wrote it about a friend of his, I believe, and was someone making fun of his indecisiveness on an actual hike. So it was very, very literal. And the whole less traveled narrative is something that Frost invents after the fact, and it's a story somewhat retrofitted into what was probably just a gut feeling decision in the moment. But what he does say, and that was part irony in itself, which I think is ironic in itself, but he does say it made all the difference. And that's the part that I end up thinking about quite a bit, because taking that into my TPE dynamic, when you really lean into it, you are making a choice that most people in your life will find somewhere between baffling and mildly concerning. And you are choosing a road that does not have a lot of signage, and there's no template for what people's lives look like when power is genuinely structurally exchanged in a way that's as literal as it is, let's just say, almost a hope to keep going further and further into that power exchange, because you can say total all you want, but you always find something else to work on, right? So you build it as you go. You make decisions that feel right before you can even articulate why, and you find out later what they meant. And some of those decisions are quite simple that have no great impact on your life whatsoever. And some of those really change the entire course of your life and of those you own. And when it's on me to choose what they do to approve of, say, career choices, life choices, personal connections, sometimes one choice opens a door, but it does close another. And I like to think that that's what this poem is about, even though it's not. But that's what I like to think, that it's the absence of the road you did not take. And I like to think that's what it's about. You aren't celebrating the fact that you took the road that's least trodden on and that you're special for that reason, but instead the title is about the road you didn't take, all the versions of the dynamic we did not choose, and all the configurations of our life that could have existed and don't. And the ghost of that is always there. What it would look like if I did this differently, or if I said this differently, or if I made this choice different, what would their life look like if we'd drawn completely different lines? But, it says, and that has made all the difference. I shall be telling this with a sigh. The choice is made, the self splits at that fork, and you just keep walking, and somehow I really can't put it any other way, but it does make all the difference. That's the whole thing. And maybe when we're out there and we're past walking that road, we'll tell ourselves a very good story about it later and make it all make sense retroactively. But, I think it's possibly because I'm already several stanzas in that story and there's no going back now. But I think it's somewhat nice that you just take a road and you take it, and you have to commit to it, and you have to be proud of it. And those who walk with you and behind you just go along, and that makes all the differences in your life, regardless of what any other possibility could be. Not to kind of go philosophical over on your podcast.
No, we love philosophy here. So deep and complex and beautiful. Thank you for
I thought
sharing.
about that a lot. I've thought
Yeah.
about this one a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell. I love it. Yeah, philosophy is more than welcome here. You can ramble about that all you like.
All right, beautiful. Thank you.
So, what about in terms of your experiences? It sounds like you've been exploring total power exchange and elements of control for the majority of your adult life, at least. When you think
Correct.
about a peak erotic experience, what comes to mind? A time that, really just stays with you?
The peak erotic experience. I'm going to talk about the least sexual thing ever as I go into this, but I think
Great,
eroticism and
happens.
sexuality in itself are
Mm-hmm.
kind of intertwined and not in a lot of ways. But I do believe that I can think back of the time where one of my partners, and that's Charlie again, actually, was insisting on being able to go further and further in a scene and was insisting on being able to take more and go a little bit longer and do this and do that. And I took one look into the eyes and I said, nope, we're going to step back and we're going to take a break. Now, why I did that, I have no clue. I wish I could tell you. I'm not sure what exactly told me that there was something that was being incidentally touched at that. It was a trauma play scene and we needed to just take a second, take a break and talk about it. And that was my actively going against what was wanted by my submissive. And that was pre TPE. So it felt quite odd to just really say, nope, I'm not going to trust that. And I'm going to safe word for you. And we're going to step back. And 15 minutes later, he looked at me and said, oh, I was triggered. And
Mm.
I said, yeah, I think you were. I wasn't sure, but I do think you were. And I do think that time really, really deepened the trust in a way that was very, let's just say, spiritual almost. That was very erotic in a lot of ways as well, because that deepened that connection between dominant and submissive, where that belief that the choice I make is the best for them really got cemented in a lot better
Mm.
and a lot more strongly. I think that was a pretty defining moment for me for my own ability to trust that I know where I'm leading my partners and I know where I'm taking them, even if I don't consciously fully know the extent of it, or if I can't verbalize it, or if in the moment I can't tell you that my goal is this, this, and that. I still know that I'm leading them in the right direction and that I can trust myself with that. And that by extent, I can trust their trust in me in
Mm.
moments where my own wavers. And I think that leads to a very nice cycle of I can hold myself up and I can keep myself steady, but I can also choose to lean on their trust in me to keep myself steady. And that's quite nice and very fulfilling.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I love that it built trust both in yourself and within the dynamic. It's really
It
lovely.
absolutely did.
Mm-hmm. So that's something from the past. What about looking ahead? What are you looking forward to exploring in your erotic life?
What am I looking forward to exploring? That is a very, very good question. I think I'm looking forward to, well, in a lot of ways, growing into myself a lot more. And with that, growing into the dynamic a lot more. And when I say that, I think of a piece that I wrote on my blog at the end of last year. I tried to write little reflections at the end of the year sometime. And one of the phrases I'd said was, what surprised me most this year was not how much I still have to grow, but how little that realization weakened me. And
Mm.
I'm realizing in a lot of ways that my dominance is growing into something that's even more authentic than it usually was, which is kind of crazy to say because it's such a bold part and such a core part of myself. But I'm learning to trust my partners in what they tell me a lot more in the feedback that they give me because I know that I've led them to a point where they are so in touch with themselves that they really know when they're nearing something that feels like a limit or when they can push forward, even though it doesn't feel the greatest, but they want to and they actively want to go into whatever we're doing to please and to serve. And I'm really looking forward to exploring depths of the dynamic and depth of service very specifically more intensely because even in our TPE, I'm very focused on them. I'm very focused on their well-being, and I'm very focused on making sure they're taken care of. For example, my submissive staff, I would often tell her, "You are gonna lay down and you're going to take care of yourself," and I will not allow her to push herself too far, even if it would benefit me in a lot of ways. But as we've grown into the ability to we've all grown a lot in our ability to communicate what we need and what our bodies and minds are feeling and really be in touch with ourselves. I'm able to trust when one of them tells me, "Hey, I'm able to push and I'm able to be pushed and I want to be pushed and I want to serve in a way that is a lot more all encompassing and I want to serve in a way that really takes over my days." And I'm looking forward to leaning into that and accepting service in a way that pleases me for the sake of it pleasing me, because I
Mm.
know I've taken care of them and I've put them first in so many ways, in a way that they are able to tell me if they need something, but also actively choose service and choose to serve me first in a way that's beneficial for them and for me. And I think it's just very nice that we are at that point now.
Mm. So deep and considered. And yeah, thank you for that window into your dynamics. They sound
Absolutely.
beautiful. And what about your legacy in terms of your work, both of your research and your lived experience? What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, also a very, very good question. I would say that the main reason why I do this work is so that people can feel seen, so that people can know that they really aren't alone in wanting to lean into power exchange, regardless of the side of the slash they want to be on, or whether they want to kind of hop back and forth on them for all I know, that they aren't alone in that it isn't just a result of, say, sexual trauma or a result of bad experiences in one way or another, that it can just be part of you and that's completely and entirely okay. The main thing I want to do is to make people feel seen and to take the knowledge that I gather throughout the community and that fellow colleagues gather through the community and bring it right back to them, because all of that knowledge is ours. As Kinksters, as community members, all of that knowledge is ours. And with that, give people the ability to advocate for themselves. And also, with that knowledge, really reduce the necessity for us to advocate for ourselves, right?
Mm.
If I take the perspective of just mental health, at this very moment, I believe the latest piece of research on that was in 2013. We have 76% of therapists in a survey that had treated at least one kink identified client, which is a good amount, one would say.
Mhm.
But only 48% of those believed that they had competence in that area.
Mm.
So it's the world isn't really made to allow space for those power exchange relationship structures, because they are still so stigmatized. There's, I believe, two-thirds of these folks, about 60, 65, I believe 64 was the number, reported receiving absolutely no training on kink whatsoever during graduate education.
Right.
And even if we're talking about human sexuality courses, we have under 30% of these folks that learned anything specific to kink. And we're talking about sexuality courses, right? The knowledge
Mm.
is not there. The knowledge is not being disseminated as much as it should be. It's growing now thanks to fellow researchers, to so many wonderful organizations and institutions. But we need and we deserve to have healthcare and mental health care that accounts for sides of us that are just present because they are present, without any need for explanation around it, without any need to justify why, say, one person walks in and has a collar around their neck, and they shouldn't have to justify it. If somebody says, "I would prefer for this person to make decisions around this for me," it really should not have to be justified, as long as everything is being done consensually and respectfully with everybody involved and around and who can witness what's going on. I think I just want people to understand that they are allowed to exist and to do that freely and to freely speak of themselves and their relationships and who they are, because for many of us, kink is as much identity as it is practice.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. So where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
So, more about me. I can be found on dominantdiscourse.com, which is where all of my pieces of writing and ramblings and reflections are. And at Dominant Discourse on Instagram is where you find all of the little short form slides and the occasional rambles on the stories as well. And if you do want to support me, you can find me on Ko-Fi at Dominant Discourse as well. It's all the same everywhere, really. And yeah, I do believe I've covered all of the platforms at the moment, but if I ever end up anywhere else, it will still be at Dominant Discourse.
Okay, great. And finally, if you had to sum up your erotic self in one word right now and one word only, what would it be?
I do think the word would be steady, which, if you know anything about kink dynamics, is maybe not the sexiest word on paper, but I think there's something really deeply erotic and comforting about reliability, about someone being the kind of person somebody can count on. And I take a lot of pride in being a pillar for the people around me. And over time, that word has picked up even more meaning for me personally as well, because it's not about being unruffled or having it all together or being completely unwavering and unfeeling, but it's more like I'm going to keep moving and I'm going to keep trying and I'm going to keep growing and I'm going to do it with some degree of grace, even when things are really messy and, unsteady, funnily enough. It's going to be steady progress in an unsteady world. And we're all just doing our best, and I've made peace with that steadiness within myself being enough.
Wonderful. Well, Aidan, thank you for sharing such a thoughtful and deeply personal perspective on power, control, trauma, and connection. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erotic Realm Podcast. This is an independent podcast. If you want to see more episodes made, you can support it at psychologyofdesire.com by becoming a paid subscriber and entering the realm with many other supporters. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize kink and desire in all of its forms. And we can't do that without you. Until the next time, stay perverted.